So your net pay is $3,081, $1,400 more than what I'm making in my current job. In this video, I'm starting a series called Paycheck Wars, where I compare paychecks of nurses working in different specialties or nursing paychecks to other professions. And our first guest in this episode is Mary Grace, a local agency nurse that works in the LA region of California. Mary Grace asked to remain anonymous in this video, but the value she's going to be providing to those of you who are looking to get into your own local travel agency jobs is going to be priceless. So make sure you watch or listen all the way to the end of the video. So how does local traveling work?
You just take the actual travel pay and then they'll just tax all of it instead of taxing that portion. And then I can just keep renewing as long as they need me.
You said you work in a children's hospital right now, right?
Yeah.
Why did you get into peds?
I'm in NICU, so I cannot do anything older than 1 year. It's too much.
Yeah.
Sometimes we can have up to 15 months, but I panic. Once they even above 9 months, I'm like, oh man, this is scary. But I love NICU.
Is that what you've done since graduating nursing school?
No, I did a year in adult neuro in a trauma hospital. I wanted to go to trauma ICU. They didn't have any space. They put me in the NICU. I was really scared. And then I realized, the heaviest lifting I do is 15 pounds. So, but I like high acuity NICU. That's why I'm at the children's hospital, because it's we have level 2, 3, and 4. Level 2 is nursery. Level 3 is most cases, I guess, preemies. And level 4 is they do all the surgeries, ECMO. So I love level 4 just because it's high acuity, but I feel like I'm doing a lot.
It's interesting because you say that for you, a level 4 is the higher acuity, whereas if you're working in an emergency department, the level 1
is different.
Yeah.
It's
backwards.
Yeah, it's opposite. It's hard because when I talk to adult ICU nurses or something, they're like, I say it again and I'm like, okay, just think highest acuity NICU. That's what I like to be in. So
what are your ratios like?
1-to-1.
That's awesome.
It's pretty rare that it's 1-to-2. If it's 1-to-2, then they're still pretty sick. But if I go to a lower level NICU, then we can have, I think, 1-to-3 or 1-to-4 if they're just, if we're just feeding and growing them. If they're just your normal preemies that don't need any surgeries.
Have you worked outside of California?
I worked in Virginia, and then I worked in Guam, and then I worked in a lot of the hospitals here in LA.
And how would you compare nursing here to nursing in those areas?
Oh, God. That's why I've been here this whole time. I can't leave just because in Virginia, I don't get breaks. I remember it would be 4 a.m, and I'm like, man, can I eat? And they're like, you can eat at your bedside. And I'm like, oh my God.
I just actually made a video, breaking news, about the Oregon state law that just got passed with the mandates. So in Oregon, I know California has state mandates, right? And here we have specified nurse to patient ratio laws, right? Yeah. You don't have that anywhere else in the US. So here, that if you're working in the ICU and you have a trauma victim, that one's going to be a 1-to-1. If you have a tele patient, that one's going to be a 1-to-4. We know because they set these laws when they passed it.
Yeah.
But no other state has that up until now. Now, Oregon actually has that as well. But in Oregon, they went a step further and they have ratios for CNAs as well. So if there's CNAs that are working on the units, they can't have more than, I believe it's 7 patients during the day shift. And then I think 9 or 10, maybe more, up to 12 patients on night, something like that. But hey, I think that's great. That's something that all states should be implementing. And I don't know why they're not. Well, part of it is though.
In Virginia, that neuro unit I was on night shift, I would have up to 7. Day shift, I would have up to 5. And then our CNAs, they would have, it was a 38-bed unit. They would split the CNAs you get this half and you get this half. And then most of the time they were sitting because it was a neuro unit. And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like New York. That's just
oh my God.
So why did you go to Guam?
I wanted Hawaii, but the Hawaii contracts, because remember at the time anything above $2,000 a week was it was like nice. It was like premium. And so then Hawaii at the time was, I think they were paying like 1500 a week. So I was like, I don't know if I can do it there. Like I can't. And then Guam, they were like, okay, we'll pay 2000 a week. We'll pay for your flight and then we'll pay for your housing and then give you money on top of your housing. So I was
Ooh,
like, oh, okay. And then they provided like shuttle transportation and all that stuff. And then it was really close to the Philippines where my family's from. So I was like, okay, I'll just fly to the Philippines on the weekends. Because over there, if you have 3 to 4 days off, all those nurses and all the docs, they'd be like, oh, I'm just gonna go to Japan for the weekend. Like, okay. Man,
now, how long is
I,
the flight from there to the Philippines?
I think it was like 3-ish hours.
You're lying.
Yeah, Guam to the Philippines was like, I'm pretty sure it was like, yeah, 2.5
That
to
is
4 something.
awesome. Oh
It
man,
was quick. And then the tickets at the time were like $200.
what?
And then there's not really like a time difference. So
Yeah.
then you go there and you're just like, okay, whatever. So I think I'm pretty sure I made like 6 flights or something out there because it was so easy.
That's
And
beautiful.
then when I was there, I just kept going to like Hong Kong, Bali. Like it was so easy. It was just nice. And then that was probably my favorite contract out of everything.
What was the cost of living like over there?
It's high. But then I also didn't really experience having to find housing at the time because they just gave it to me. But I know people now, like I'm looking at how much the apartments are there now, because now they don't do that. Now you have to find your own place with the housing money. And I mean, now it's like pretty equivalent to LA where it's like $2,000-3,000 like a month or something. And I'm just like, why? Like my experience was so different, but I really enjoyed that contract. I stayed there for almost, I think 5 or 6 months.
Oh, that's a long
But
time.
then I started getting island fever. That's why I left.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what happened to a
But
lot of nurses that go to Hawaii, actually. They feel like,
yeah.
they're too far from family. It's great being on an island with crystal clear water and
Hmm.
just tropical feeling, and also
Yeah.
being so close to all these beautiful countries like the Philippines and everything else. But after a while, you start realizing if you want to go on a day trip, where are you going to go? You're stuck on an island, right?
You're stuck there.
Yeah.
I felt so spoiled saying that, but then I was like, man, you can go around the whole island of Guam in 3 hours. And at one point, I think the first 2 weeks were great for me there. And I remember like the next following 3 weeks, it was just raining and raining and raining. And I was like, oh my God, I'm just stuck in the house or going to the hospital because I can't, there's nothing else to see.
Yeah.
And then like the island is just so small. There's nothing else you can really do. I mean, a lot of it, yeah, if it's not raining, you can snorkel and you can do all those water sports. But then if it is raining, like you're kind of screwed. Like, and I was single at the time too. So I was like just enjoying myself. But then I don't know, at one point I was like, man, I'm so alone on this rock. Like I need to get off.
So at what point did you meet your husband?
When I came back from that contract. We
Uh,
met at a shopping center here in
really?
LA. Yeah, and he's actually a physician,
Oh,
but
that's awesome.
we didn't meet at work.
Yeah.
We met at the mall. But I didn't stay in LA because of him. I stayed in LA just because I think I wanted to go to New York for a contract and I wanted to go to Australia for a contract, but Australia like the contracts were just I don't know, they said, "Oh, you would have to sign for like a year." And I got really scared because I was like, "A year?" And then for New York, everybody was telling me like, your ratios are going to go back to what they were in Virginia." And I was like,
Even worse, actually. I tell this story to everyone, but when I worked in New York, I remember my first week off orientation, I got 17 patients assigned to me. But this is
for
the
ED,
ER.
right?
It's
Okay.
completely different than all the other units. Although when I worked tele, I used to get up to 11 patients in a
Yeah.
telemetry floor. So, I mean, they had no ratios. And even now, they try to implement something that kind of resembles a ratio law, but they don't specify how many patients each nurse can have by the specialty that they work in. So it really
Mhm.
doesn't make a difference compared to what they had before. I don't think it's going to be enforced at all.
See, I thought after that whole drama that they had, I thought they were gonna, like change everything. So then I was actually getting ready to, get my New York license. I was like, all right, I'm gonna finally like accomplish my dream of going to New York for a contract.
That's
And
so
then they were like, I don't think it's gonna change anytime soon. Like,
funny.
and I said, oh my God, I'm never gonna get
Yeah.
there.
So now, are you still in LA, like the city of LA?
Yeah.
Oh,
You mean working or living?
both. Where are you working and where are you living?
I'm still working at Children. I'm
Oh, oh, okay.
I'm pretty much like gonna I'm like some of the travelers that have been there, like the real travelers that have been
Mhm.
there for years, they told me, these rates, this is the highest rate in the country right now. Like it's
Yeah.
been the highest since I went back there. So they said, you need to ride it out until it pretty much dies down, especially since they know you and I train there as staff, so they know me so well that they're like, okay, let's just keep her there. And then I said, you know what, like I'm just gonna ride it out until their rates drop. And then because right now the difference between their rate compared to like other NICU rates in the country, I think it's almost like 1,500 or 2,000. So
Mm.
I said, yeah, there's no way, like I need to stay here. I can't go anywhere else right now.
All right.
So
So
that's
you sent me your pay stub, and we're gonna compare your pay stub as a agency nurse, your local agency nurse, right, to my pay stub as a staff nurse working. I work for Kaiser Permanente in the ER. For those of you out there, because I ran a poll the other day asking our members or our subscribers and our viewers on YouTube who's a nurse, who's a student nurse, who's another type of healthcare worker, and who's working in a completely unrelated field to healthcare. And about 60% of them said that they were nurses. Almost 30% of them said that they were student nurses. So a total of 80% of the people who actually follow us are nurses or are either trying to become nurses right now.
mhm.
So for those of you that are trying to become nurses, I want to explain to you what I do in the ER, and then maybe you can explain to them what you do in your specialty, right?
Okay.
So as an ER nurse, basically what I do is when patients feel like they need to be treated for an illness, they'll come to the ER and they'll either walk into the ER through the waiting room or they'll be brought into the ER by the paramedic, right? If they get brought into the ER by the paramedics, usually you would think that they're sicker, but that's not always the case. We've had plenty of patients that have come to the ER with stroke-like symptoms or a heart attack, and they walked into the ER, right? So once they walk into the ER, there's many roles that an ER nurse might have. So me, oftentimes you'll find me doing what's called a team lead role, where
Mm.
when patients come in, I am one of the frontline nurses who will reassign these patients to different areas, and I'll delegate work to the nurses in the area that I'm working in. And the doctors will see them up front, and then the doctors will determine where they need to go from there. And I'm the one that's responsible for reassigning them to the different areas. That's one of the roles. So I'll be telling the nurses in that specific role, can you put an IV on this patient? We're going to get this patient admitted into the hospital, so we need to get them into a bed so they can lay there, wait for the results, and then get assigned to a bed after all of the results are back, and they get a consultation from a specialist or something like that. I can also tell the nurses, this patient's only going to be here for a few hours. Maybe they need a CAT scan. Maybe they just need an X-ray. And if everything is normal, they're going to go back home. And then there's other roles in the ER. If I'm one of the nurses that is being assigned patients, so that's called the bedside nurse, I'm the nurse that's medicating the patient. I'm the nurse that's looking at the results to see and follow up with the doctor what the next part of the plan is going to be. And there's a resource nurse in the department. This is a nurse that's just going to take critical labs. And this is the nurse
Mhm.
that's going to be present when we have a stroke notification or a myocardial infarction, which is a heart attack. If we have a patient like that, the resource nurse is the go-to nurse that's going to call the doctors that need to be there, that need to be present, like the cardiologist, the neurologist. They're the ones that are the most reliable person because they know everything that needs to happen and needs to get done so that the patient can be treated as quickly as possible. Then we also have break nurses in our department. So we have nurses that are going to relieve other nurses on their lunch breaks, or if you need a 15-minute break, the break nurses are responsible for that. So there's so many different areas in the emergency department that you can work in. That's why I like working in the emergency department, because you're not
Yeah.
stuck in just one position. You can do so many different things and you
Yeah.
don't have to be at the bedside. Now, in terms of my schedule, I typically work currently about 20 hours a week. And I used to work 30 hours a week. So I did pick up some extra hours for this specific pay stub. Now, Mary Grace, I want you to tell everybody what it is that you do and what kind of roles nurses in your department would hold.
So NICU, I mean, the ones that I've worked in, it's either level 3 or level 4. So it's level 3 is, we do everything except any surgeries or ECMO or any of the really specialized cases. Then we usually will transfer them out to level 4. And then level 4 NICU, they pretty much have every specialist available. And then they'll do any type of surgery. They'll do ECMO, they do dialysis, and these are for babies. So they'll take on any case, any syndrome. When I worked level three, it was a delivery hospital. So then we would attend all the emergency deliveries if, if they're having D-cells or if mom has high blood pressure or, if she has any high risk factors, then we'll go to that delivery and then we'll, resuscitate the baby and then usually bring the baby back to NICU, stabilize them, transfer them out or keep them in our NICU. And then we get babies up to, I think it's still 23 weeks, but I've seen some places take 22 weeks and early,
Yeah.
like 20, earlier than 23 weeks. And then we'll go up to however, from there. A lot of the times we get premature babies and we're just trying to stabilize them on whatever type of ventilator they need. And then we'll usually just try to grow them, to the best of our ability. And then if they need any type of surgery, then we'll transfer them out. At the level fours, we take any type of syndrome. I've seen everything. So any type of syndrome, any rare case, there's a lot of like genetic stuff going on, a lot of cardiac babies, there's a lot of neuro stuff going on. So kind of everything. And then we'll typically do their surgeries, as long as they're big enough, then we'll do their surgeries. We'll just manage their cases and then go from there. A lot of the times they'll get discharged from that hospital or we'll transfer them back to the level three hospital. But there's not as much different roles like you were explaining in the ED, because for us, it's usually just who's in charge. So we have our charge nurse who pretty much handles all the assignments on the unit, handles any difficulties with families or any issues with anybody's roles. And then we'll have our resource nurses. So the hospital that I'm at now, we have usually 3 resource nurses. We usually have like a backup charge nurse and then a nurse to do all the picks and any IVs. And then we have a nurse to be free for admissions. But all 3 of those nurses are usually helping out with anyone's labs or anyone's IVs or anyone's, if, we do line changes on night shift too. So if there's a nurse with, that has a baby on VEC and any paralytics or any like really sensitive drips, then we usually have a second person helping. And then we don't have break nurses at the hospital, but I did work at a Kaiser where we had break nurses, which was really nice. But we usually break each other if possible. And then, but it's always assigned at the beginning of the shift. So you already know what time you're going to go. And then you already know what time you're going to go in the second half of the shift. And then we have like a clinical educator who usually, if we have really rare cases, the educator usually reaches out to a lot of the other children's hospitals or any of the other bigger NICUs to ask for, what do we do in this situation? That happens a lot just because some of these babies are like the 1 in a million case that, we don't really get them often. So then we'll look up like, how are we supposed to handle this case or do we need to transfer them out? And then we have nurses who specialize in ECMO. And then there's some nurses who specialize in our new form of dialysis. I think most of our nurses can do cooling and post-op and yeah.
Do you know if these nurses get paid a higher rate for being specialized in ECMO?
If they're part of the ECMO team, only at this hospital, right? If they're part of the ECMO team, they get paid differently. I don't know if it's higher or I don't know if it's just the same or what.
Yeah.
But they're a different area. And then we have the NICU nurse who is also doing the ECMO patient. They don't get any differential. Which kind of like it makes it really hard to be motivated to take ECMO because you're working the same 12-hour shift as the next nurse, but you're not you're working a lot harder. Those nurses who they do it because they love it. I can tell they really love like working with ECMO patients, and then either they're trying to level up and like become charge or just gain more skills, but there really has to be that motivating factor to do that because it's just mentally taxing for that shift, especially these are babies. One second, I have a dog.
Oh, that sounded like a baby for a second.
He's been handing me all his toys this last like half hour.
So you said you work, 36 hours a week, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, currently. All right. And how many hours per shift do nurses typically work where you work?
They usually work the 3 12-hour shifts.
3 12s. Okay. The reason I ask is because in the ER, we have so many different shifts available for nurses who want to pick up different templates. we have nurses that can work 4 hours per day, right? So,
Oh,
but it varies the amount of hours per week that they work. So some nurses, let's say they're working 24 hours a week, but they work 4 hours shifts. Yeah, that's crazy. Like I haven't really heard of that in any other hospital. So you would
yeah.
have to work 6 shifts per week to make up those 24 hours. There's nurses that work 8 hour shifts. There's nurses that work 12 hour shifts. There's nurses that work, like, let's just say, only weekends, or there's nurses that only work 2 12s per week, something like that. Like, they're just all over the place. But me personally, I work 8 hour shifts in the department and I work 20 hours a week. So that adds up to a total of 40 hours a week, which is 5 days. I mean, 40 hours every 2 weeks, which is 5 days every 2 weeks. That's how many hours and how many days I work. And then I'm also
Why, do
off.
you know why they do that? Or
Oh, they
why they
do
make
that
it so
because,
variable?
yeah, they do that because they want to bolus some of the times with extra nurses. Because what happens in the ER, sometimes it might be busier during, let's say, 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. In the ER,
Oh,
because people are getting out of work, and at that time is when they're able to go to the ER to be seen. So they would prefer to have extra nurses during those times, and they don't need them after that. So if they can just hire some nurses to work those specific hours of the day, it would be more beneficial to the hospital because they don't have to hire nurses for an entire 8 hour or 12-hour shift.
oh, okay. Because I know in NICU we need more, we need consistency with the baby. So I
Makes
think
sense.
that's why they really try to keep
Yeah.
the same nurse for the entire 12 hours.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. In the ER, you might get a patient that's in and out within an hour. So you don't really need that continuity of care in the ER like you
Yeah.
would on the med surg floor, tele floor, ICU, NICU, whatever the case may be. All right, so let's get down to it. We're going to compare both of our pay stubs. I have my pay stub on one side and your pay stub on the other side. Tell me how many hours you worked this week, this for this specific pay period.
This one was the 36 hours.
Okay. Now I see here it says 24 hours were regular pay and then 12 hours were overtime. What does that mean?
They do time and a half after 8 hours.
Ah, see? Okay, so some facilities in California do not do that. Kaiser is one of them,
Mm,
believe it or
they
not.
don't?
Yeah, so I've
Huh.
when I used to work 12-hour shifts, I
Yeah.
remember looking at my pay stub and I'm like, why is it that I'm not getting the time and a half after the eighth hour?
Yeah.
Because I thought the California law stated that you're supposed to get it after the eighth hour. But I believe it was actually part of a union negotiation, if I'm not mistaken, where they did away with it for 12-hour shift nurses because we only had 8-hour shifts previously and nurses wanted the 12-hour shift. So because of that, they've allowed more units to implement 12-hour shifts with the premise that they would not get paid the time and a half after the 8th hour. However, after the 12th hour, you do get paid the double time. So that does count for
Mm.
something. But that's why I've
Hmm.
always stayed an 8-hour shift nurse, because I want to get that time and a half, because if you're
Yeah.
8 hours, you still get it.
And then you just stay over and then you get your overtime, right? I
Exactly.
know. I like what you're doing.
Yeah,
I
right?
wish I could. Well, we
Yeah.
just don't have any 8 hours.
I know, I know. And it's great because, like, when you work 8 hours, coming from a 12-hour shift nurse, if you go to 8 hours, it feels like you're barely there. And you have a 1 hour lunch break also.
Yeah.
Okay, so I also see here that meals reimbursement, you had 150 per hour for your meal reimbursement.
I think they just tried to, I don't know. I feel like they just tried to sprinkle in some things in
I
there
see.
to make it seem like, oh, okay, like we're gonna give you some money for meals and then your car.
Yeah, yeah,
But at the same time, I think for me, I just look at it as an overall thing because all of it gets taxed anyway,
yes,
versus when I used to really look at my pay and where the money goes.
yeah.
Now I'm just kind of like, oh, well, it's all gonna get taxed. But
Do you get a bonus? Because I see here there's $666. What is that for?
every time I finish the 36 hours for the week, then they'll give me that pay too. I think it's another way of just dividing up my pay.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So then, but it makes a big difference if I do, like, if I actually call out a shift or something because they don't
Yeah,
give it to me. And then I'm just like, oh my God, like
yeah,
it makes such a big difference with the pay. And then the overtime flat rate, I think it's also like another form of
yeah,
adding onto it too. So yeah, at the end of it, like it's still gonna give me the weekly gross,
yeah.
and then I kind of look at it from there.
Cool. So if you look at mine, you can see that my regular amount of hours that I worked, it was 53.27 hours. And I got paid $86 as my base rate. For my differential working night shift, I earned $12.25 per hour for my night shift differential, right? So I
Hmm.
was making about $99 an hour, something like that,
Hmm.
$98 an hour. And what is your hourly rate in your current workplace?
Technically, it's 105.
Yeah.
But if I don't, I also still don't look at it really. I
Yeah.
think just because what I do is I just take the gross and I just divide it by 36 because everything kind of just looks like fluff at that point.
That's exactly how I do it because I remember I used to do breakdowns of my pay before. Just like you said, they sprinkle so much of this stuff in there to kind of
Yeah,
fluff up your pay. And it gets complicated when you're trying to
yeah,
figure out why did I get paid this much in like this time and a half, but there's another time and a half and I got paid a different amount of hours for that time and a half. So it
yeah.
gets confusing.
That's why at that point, because I remember my recruiter would be, when they do raise my rate, they raise it by the regular hourly. They
Yeah.
don't really touch anything else. But then for me, I'm just like, okay, like it's just going to add to the total. Like
I
just,
see.
so I always just take that gross pay number and then I just divide it by 36 and I look at it that way.
See, so I was only working 30 hours a week during that time period where the pay stub that I'm showing you. So you can see for mine, I actually have like 13.4 hours that are double time hours because
Hmm.
I used to pick up an extra 4 hours after my 12 hours are done. And I would do that sometimes 3 times a pay period, which is
Hmm.
why I have about 13 hours of extra double time in there. And at the end of the pay period, I worked 70.7 hours. Whereas I see for you, you worked a total of 36 hours, right? If I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken. You usually only work 36 hours and no more than that. Is that correct?
Yeah, per week.
Okay. So when we look at your federal taxes, it looks like you had $1,199 that were deducted for your federal taxes. For me, it was 1,076. Now think about it. You worked fewer hours and
Yeah.
you had more deducted from your pay stub than me. I worked,
I also take out or I request to like have more taken out than usual. I mean,
um,
I'll put like I used to put, I mean, before I was married, I would just put yeah, zeros on everything, but I wanted like the most out because I was so afraid of I didn't know how local
yeah.
taxing or local travel nurse taxes work just yet, so I was still like being more conservative on that side too.
Makes sense because you don't want to end up paying money at the end of the year, right? But
Yeah,
me, I'd rather pay a few dollars more than have the government take my money, because
at the
we
end.
have more money every paycheck. So let's
Yeah.
do it that way. So all these numbers, what we need to do, right, is for Mary Grace's numbers, you're going to multiply these numbers by 2 in order to find out how close they are to my numbers. So ultimately, the total number of tax deductions that you had was 2157 for that pay period, and I had 2288 for this pay period.
Hmm.
Now, we also were maxing out our 401k. So for our 401k, we were having like 18% of our paycheck going towards our contribution of our 401k. In
Yeah.
addition to that, like I also had an FSA, which is like a federal savings account. So like if you
Hmm.
have any medical related bills that you need to pay, you can use your FSA account to pay for that. Or even beauty supplies, you can pay for them with your FSA account and they're tax free, basically, which is cool
Yeah.
because you don't pay taxes on all these purchases. And the reason why we got the FSA account was because we wanted to pay for our daughter's braces.
Yeah. I should mention my FSA and all my benefits now are under my husband's since
Oh,
January of this year. So
congratulations.
that changes my numbers. I do max out my 401, so that number reflects that. But
Gotcha.
that's why you don't see like any of the benefits on there too.
Ah.
So I get to see more of my paycheck.
So your net pay is $3,081.
Uh-huh.
And if you multiply that by 2, every 2 weeks, you're coming home with $6,162,
Yes.
right? Which is $1,400 more than what I'm making in my current job with kind of similar number of hours that you're working. So I'm trying to figure out how is it that you get paid so much more than I do? Well, for one, it's your hourly rate, right? You're making
Yeah.
$105 an hour,
Hmm.
and I'm making in this paycheck $98 an hour or so. That's one.
Hmm.
Two is this paycheck that I have here also reflects my 401k contributions, right? Which is 18% of my income.
Yeah.
And the
Mine is
FSA. Yeah.
I think 11. I just changed it to 12%, but it's 11% for mine. But I have to be so careful with mine because my rates like constantly change every time I renew contracts. So it increases, like my rates have been increasing this whole time, but then I need to keep readjusting how much is going into that 401 because yeah, otherwise I'm just like throwing money like into it. But
So the reason why I wanted to do this paycheck versus paycheck is because, again, people don't know how much you get paid on a weekly basis or a biweekly basis if they want to get into nursing. Or if you're a nurse that's already working in an area, like maybe you're working in another state and you want to know how much nurses in California get paid or in another state get paid or a different specialty, it's kind of
yeah.
cool to compare these pay stubs because you're an agency nurse, you're a local agency nurse. You don't get the stipend that a typical agency nurse would get, do you?
No, because I guess we say registry too, right? Like I did registry for Kaiser too. That pay was completely different. This like local travel nurse contract, because that pay was, I just work when I felt like working. I never had any contract or commitment.
Yeah.
With local travel nursing, I actually have like a 13-week set contract. So I don't know if that just makes a bigger difference. I think for
Yeah.
me, I just wanted to stay in the area. I wanted to work at that specific hospital. I was very picky with what I wanted, but I didn't want my staff pay anymore. I didn't want to do charge nurse anymore. Like
Oh, I
I
feel
wanted to work smarter
yeah, I
and
get it.
stop working harder.
Okay, so this one is before you went into agency nursing, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
this
And I
is
see your
the,
regular rate was 53.56 per hour. That is a huge difference. That's half of what you currently.
I know. This is the hospital across the street.
Oh my gosh.
And this
That's
is a union
insane.
hospital.
Wow. So for those nurses out there who are thinking about getting into like local agency jobs, this is your proof right here. So it looks like you worked here a total of 36 hours a week, and then your take home pay here as a staff nurse, not an agency nurse,
Mhm.
was $2,806 for 2 weeks of work.
Yeah,
Compared to the 4,000 that you're making now, right? Well, no,
per week.
6,000.
Yeah,
6,000. That's insane.
I
You are
know. And
living the life now.
if you if you take away like the all the benefits and everything,
Yeah,
it's still way more.
yeah,
Because
absolutely.
even when I was paying for my own benefits and all that stuff,
Mhm.
like I mean, the difference is still by a lot.
But what benefits do you not get now that you used to get as a staff nurse? Let's say you are a single local agency nurse. Do they provide you with health insurance?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah. I took the agency's health insurance before we were married.
gotcha.
So
And how much is it? How much do you have to pay out of pocket?
yeah, it was about 200 per month.
Wow, that's pretty good, though. That's really good, actually.
Yeah.
You know, I
Uh,
say that it's really good because I've considered going per diem before
mhm,
because my wife, Monica, she makes $124 an hour as a per diemer.
mhm.
And I
Yeah.
told myself if I can make that much and she can make that much, we could just like pay for insurance out of pocket and we'd
Yeah.
still be pretty well off. But when I looked at it for a family of four, if we want the same insurance that we currently have, it would
Mhm,
cost us $2,000 per month for a family of four. And that doesn't even include dental insurance. It's like an additional, I don't know, $200, almost
mhm.
$200 per month for dental insurance.
Yeah, there's so many things to consider. That's why I don't tell people, go into doing local travel right away, but you need to really look at it when it comes to like all the benefits and if they provide 401k. Like some of my friends' contracts, they're way more high paying than mine, but then they don't get a 401k.
Uh,
And some of them like they don't offer the healthcare. So then I said, you have to really look at it. Like, are you really making like 7, 8 thousand a week? Is it or
that's
are you just like getting it all taken away in taxes? Because I know one of the girls, she signed up for like 7,000 a week, but for 48 hours. And when she breaks it down and let's say like, okay, what do you make after 36 hours? It's still lower than like my contract and other like nurses contracts after all the taxes and everything. And she was like, what did I do? So
Wait, so how did you apply as a local agency nurse? Because you said you went through AMN.
Actually, I do. I just told my recruiters because I was with them when I did a local contract with Kaiser. But even with that local contract, I was just open about it. I said, "Hey, I don't want to go anywhere far. I just want these certain hospitals that are like 20 miles away from me, and I want to do local. Like, can you just turn it into a local contract? Just tax all of it? Because some agencies they won't do that for you. They won't. They'll say like, no, this is just a real travel contract. Like, you have to be like 50 miles away. You have to duplicate your expenses." And I'm like, okay, that's BS because like
Yeah,
like you can just tax the whole thing and just give it to me.
exactly.
But that's exactly why I wanted to do it. And I know children's has such a high need, so I it was like way worth it for me because I know that I'm going to be able to keep renewing until they say, okay, we don't want you to renew anymore. But knowing that I was staffed there before and like just knowing the managers, I think I'm at a pretty good spot where I'm comfortable that they're going to just keep renewing me until the hospital is like, all right, like we've had enough. But if we come to that point, then I can rotate out. There's so many like NICUs here in LA that I can just go to another one.
Do you have any coworkers that saw you go from staff to local
Yeah.
agency?
So actually, there was like this whole thing where the manager said if you left to go travel, you cannot come back here as a traveler, which I don't even know if that's legal,
Yeah, yeah.
but they did that to a lot of like the nurses coming back after COVID. But I made it known that when I left there to work at Cedars as per diem. I didn't leave like to go into travel nursing
Yeah,
because I actually left travel nursing to go staff there so I could train there.
yeah.
And I told them, I was like, hey, just FYI, like I wasn't one of those. um, so they were just like, oh, okay, like we'll just take you back. But then the first year, I felt very weird because my coworkers knew. They knew how much I was making. I mean, I posted it all the time, like on Instagram, just like trying to encourage people, like, hey, you don't have to be working so many shifts to just like barely make the amount that I make. Like you can do the same thing I'm doing because a lot of them are struggling with like student loans and all that stuff. And I said, you could do it too. And they're like, yeah, but you were crazy. Like you you were working your two full times. And I was like, okay, you don't need to do two full times, but
Yeah.
you can definitely work smarter. And I wanted people to just see the possibility because a lot of people they feel like, oh, I'm just stuck at this staff job
Mhm.
and I could just go to another staff job and then I'd be stuck there too. And it's like, yeah, but there's so many ways to make more money, like without having to slave away like at your nights or whatever you work at. And I think that's why I just kept posting my salary and posting like the rates and stuff for people to see. And then they would get pissed off because they'd be like, what do you mean a PICU nurse? Like they'll pay them $8,000 to $9,000 and I'm doing the same
Yeah.
job. And I'm like, I don't know.
I don't understand why some nurses get so bitter when travel
Mhm.
nurses make more money than them. If you feel like they're making more money than you, then just change your position, do something to make more
Yeah,
money. You're not
but they
stuck in the
won't.
position that you're in.
The only thing I do have or I like is a con, I guess for me, is I don't get to pick my schedule. But I knew that going in. And the scheduler knows me too, so she's pretty lenient with me. But that's kind of with any job. And even my staff job before, we were on a pattern schedule. So I was already irritated then. So I was like, I might as well be irritated now. And then for one, like some of my months that I've been working there, sometimes they don't even schedule me on the weekends because, there's so many staff nurses scheduled on the weekends already. So then there's times where I'm just not, where I'm working like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then I'm done for the week and then that's
That's
it.
pretty cool.
So there's a lot of benefits
Yeah.
to it. And I think people just like, they're afraid to try. They're afraid they'll say like, oh, I can't get benefits. I can't like get a 401. I'm going to lose my seniority, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, but think about where you were, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Are you in the same financial spot? Because if you're not moving, then you need to move. Like, why are
Well,
you just sitting there?
I'll tell you this, Mary Grace. After watching this video, I guarantee you we're going to get hundreds of viewers that are going to go into local travel agency jobs because of you.
I try to encourage people to do it, but they're afraid. And I understand it's really scary. It's scary to start in a new place and it isn't stable. But I mean, I've been doing this or just travel since 2016 is when I signed my first contract and I've been able to land contracts since then. And I know other travel nurses who had been doing it in like the 80s, 90s and
Yeah.
they're
Wow.
pretty set now. So I think because my goal is to retire early. I don't want to
Same
like
here. Ah,
same at the bedside. And I
amen
think,
to
I
that.
know I know. And then a lot of like my coworkers, they're like, how? Like, how? What do you mean how? Like, I'm telling you how. Like, no one listens to me.
Yeah. And they're, I mean, living paycheck to paycheck too. That's what's sad. You know, whenever I see a nurse that's living paycheck to paycheck, I'm like, you need to change your circumstances. Like, there's
Yeah.
no reason why any nurse in this country should be living paycheck to paycheck when they're caring for like the most vulnerable of the population.
Like one of my coworkers, she has three kids, and then she went into local travel last year
Mhm.
after struggling like paycheck to paycheck. And then when she got her first like month of week by week pay,
Yeah.
she's like, man, I can breathe. And I was like, yeah,
Yeah.
of course you can breathe. And then she like took her kids on their first flight to Hawaii or something. And she finally left like our staff job and then she went full-time local travel. And I was like, you know what? Like you're doing it so well. I'm so happy for you. But just to see how she changed, I was like, man, everyone's capable of doing it. It's just if you know, you have the enough courage to move on. But a lot of people don't. But I mean, I
I
wish
know.
they did because then they don't have to struggle.
Yeah. You also
So
just have to be willing to change your priorities because when you're making more money, sometimes you start spending more money.
that too,
Yeah.
because when I have friends, sorry, I'm gonna like shift location really quick. When I have friends who go into it, I always tell them beforehand, you need to fix your budget first before you do this because once every Friday
Mhm.
hits, either you're gonna start moving all your cash and distributing everything, or you're gonna, you know, go out and go get your Gucci purse.
That's
So
true. Yeah. All
thank
right, Mary Grace,
thank
thank you so
you.
much.
Thank you,
Have a good
Jason.
one. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. And if you want to be a guest in one of our future episodes, click on the link in the description below.